Hello YouTube chess lovers and my friends, this is Gunjan here. Welcome to my second episode of Chess Gambit Buster. In today's lecture, we are going to look at very famous yet very dangerous Stafford Gambit, and you will be delighted to watch this video until the end, as not only you are going to equip with a very easy to learn system against it, but as you will see that white get a quick advantageous position just within the opening stage. Well, the critical Stafford position can be arise with the different move order. So for example, after e4, e5 and knight to f3, black can choose either the move knight to f6 or bishop to c5. By far, the most popular choice is knight to f6. And after that, actually white can choose two different paths to reach the desired Stafford position. First, let's look the most obvious one where white capture on e5. And rather than trying to get his pawn back, black played the move knight to c6, gambiting his center pawn. Here, white can decline the gambit and roll back, but I am going to recommend the accept variation, that is, knight capture c6, pawn capture c6, and although here white has multiple options, you play this straightforward move, knight to c3, defending e4 pawn, whereafter black plays bishop to c5, and guess what? Yup, we reach to one of the most poisonous position of this variation. The second move order I like the most, as if you have watched my Dirty Chess Tricks 43 and 44 episode, then I have recommended knight to c3 move here, and if black really wants to enter into the Stafford territory, then he has to play bishop to c5. After that, by force, we can reach to the same territory. Knight captures e5, knight to c6, knight captures c6, and after pawn captures c6. Guess what? Different path, but leads to same desired destination. Now, before we dive into theory, just to make you comfortable, I have created two phase plan for you, and let me reveal it right now. So phase number one is very easy. White plays very important move h3 and followed up with d3 if there is no attack on f2. So that is phase number one. Okay. Now comes phase 2, and this is very important, guys, because it all depends where your opponent wants to castle. So in the case where black try to castle on the king side, we are going to follow it up with bishop to e2 and castle on the same side. And if your opponent try to castle on the queen side, then we followed up with moves such as queen to e2 and bishop to e3, trying to castle on the same side. So if you can remember these two phases, no matter whatever move order black can throw upon you, not only you can easily diffuse it, but you get a very easy to play and a comfortable position. So keeping these things in mind, let's see how we can achieve it against different black move order. Here we go, phase number one, very important move, h3. And as you can see, I have highlighted by the arrows, black has mainly 4 good tries. Well, amongst them, h5 and queen to d4 are the most popular one, where the other twos are related to quick castle on the either side. Let's see each by turn and find out how effectively our phase theory work against them. The first move I want to consider is h5, which is in fact, as per the database, the most frequent choice. However, against our setup, probably it is the weakest one. And if you remember our phase 1, then you can easily spot White's next reply. Yup, d3, not only creating a superb pawn chain, but meanwhile setting up some nasty ideas. Can you believe the only good move in this position is bishop to e6, as rest of the black moves leads to opening disaster? Yup, you heard it right. In my online blitz, I have seen this move frequently, namely queen to d4, which I think played by a player who does not know the theory well and clearly cannot distinguish the small difference White has made. Congratulations to Black as he fall into our first tricky territory, and White response is very obvious: bishop to e3, attacking the queen. Clearly queen has the only place to go, b4, because let's say if it goes to somewhere else, then we have this tactical sequence which nabbing the piece, e5, queen captures e5, and d4, winning the piece on the spot. So that's why queen to b4 is forced here, and after that, yet another attacking move, a3. Again, Black has to be very careful as he simply cannot take on b2 due to the familiar tactic. Yup, knight to a4, double attack, and after the only move, queen to e5 and knight captures c5, White emerge with a clear piece advantage. So clearly, after a3, Black has to play queen to b6. But now Black queen is in serious danger of trapping down there. And on top of everything, White has this initiative, d4, attacking the bishop, bishop to e7, and finally I recommend this simple move, bishop to c4. And if you carefully look at this position, not only White come up with a clear pawn advantage, but Black all threats are gone. And surprisingly, if you run this position in any chess engine, it gives you +3, yup, +3, that is close to winning advantage to the White camp. In case if you are wondering why not queen to b2 here, well, the answer is very simple, knight to a4, and the Black sweetie is a goner. Well, apart from it, White has a very simple idea such as e5, castle, and play knight to a4, which may be in some line trapping down the Black queen. All in all, I think with the accurate play, White can finish up the game from this position very quickly. Okay, let's look at the second disaster move, namely castle on the king side. And once you play h5, this move doesn't make any sense. However, you should exactly know what is the reason, as if you remember my phase 2 now, if Black castle on the king side, our plan is, yup, bishop to e2 and trying to castle on the same side. Well, fortunately here White is hitting the second pawn, and if Black doesn't defend it, then we are happy to lop it off. So Black response is force, but after that, there is no second invitation required. Bam! And sooner Black king will be ripped apart. If Black continue here with h4, Then after bishop to g5, black loses his second pawn, so that's not good. And any obvious moves, let's say rook to e8, we can simply rip apart the king side with g captures h5, knight captures h5, bishop captures h5, and after pawn captures h5 and rook to g1, black can simply pack his bag and go home. The third move I want to consider is queen to d6. And obvious enough, black wants to castle on the queen side. So if you now remember my phase 2, white's obvious plan is, queen to e2. And amazingly enough, this instantly creates the threat that is e5. So black has to deal with it, and accordingly, after queen to e7, I think black has wasted a huge time, and we can follow it up with bishop to e3. And after this, no matter however black plays, white get a completely upper hand. If bishop to b4, then bishop to d2 is a very strong reply. And apart from it, let's say if black continue with his plan, namely bishop to e6, trying to remain flexible on either side castle, well, we can do the same by developing our light square bishop with first f4 threatening f5. So black has to stop it with g6, and the typical route of our light square bishop, g3, bishop to g2, and we are more than happy to castle on the same side. So if castle long, then we can castle immediately with a healthy pawn advantage. And if black castle short, then we can play bishop to g2, and after castle, once again the same story, extra pawn with the space on the king side, white is clearly better. Last but not least, what about bishop to e6? Same story guys, queen to e2, and this time black can take benefit as he has not committed queen to d6, so he can continue with queen to e7, but our plan will not change. Bishop to e3, black castles, and after we castles, again, as you can see by the arrows, the simple but effective plan of campaign by white, which is so good against all of these slow setups by the black camp. Okay, let's check out the second black big alternative, namely castle on the king side. And after that, first let us finish our first phase. D3. And as black has castle on the king side, our obvious phase 2 plan is we want to play bishop to e2 and castle on the king side. Now, as I have explained earlier, black cannot play queen to d4 because of bishop to e3. And it doesn't matter if we continue with either rook to e8 or queen to d6. Let's say rook to e8 is engine's top choice. We are going to respond obviously with bishop to e2. And now black plays tricky move, queen to d6. And one thing you should always watch out before castling, that if you prematurely castle, then after bishop to h3, black is right back in the game as he has some threats looming from the g3 square. So please don't fall for this. My golden rule is that whenever I want to castle on the king side, and if black had played the move queen to d6, I always respond with this key move, and you should remember this, queen to d2. So at first sight it looks very weird because you are blocking your own bishop, But as you can see, white has an obvious idea. He wants to first neutralize this diagonal so that he can safely castle. A sample line can goes like this. Bishop to e6. Black is finishing his development. We challenge the queen with queen to f4. And no way black wants to exchange the queen, as he is going to be a clear pawn down. So queen to d7. But after that, since our king is now completely safe, we can safely castle. And in fact, this position is dangerous for the black, as in one of my blitz game, my opponent casually continued with obvious looking move, rook a to d8, centralizing their rooks. But unfortunately, after white's next reply, queen to g3, suddenly white has some threat looming, including bishop to g5, bishop to h6, and do not forget the obvious plan, namely king to h1 and then rolling the f-pawn. Well, altogether, I think this is really fun to play as a white, especially with a whole pawn advantage. The third move I want to consider is queen to d6, where black aims to castle quickly on the queen side. And obvious enough, we are going to respond with our familiar d3. And when black plays bishop to e6, once again this queen to e2 move creating headache for the black camp. White has already a threat of e5, and surprisingly, in the Lee chess, there are 12 games played where in all of these games, black castles on the queen side and white played e5 and managed to get a completely winning position. But let's say even though your opponent doesn't fall for it, either he has to waste the move such as queen to e7, where after bishop to e3, white is completely dominating, and the other critical response, bishop to d4, can be met with knight to d1, that's the engine's original choice, but we will remain very consistent with our phase theory, and my suggestion here is, yup, bishop to d2, defending the knight. If queen to b4, then knight to d1 is a very strong reply, and black can choose which side he wants to castle, where we are going to follow him up. So if he castle on the queen side, then we can do the same, and after king to b8, as there is no h5 here, you can even improve with our setup, starting with g4. And once white get the space with bishop g2 and f4, I think black is really struggling not only with the pawn down, but the space in the center. Last but the most critical move in this position is queen to d4, which clearly stopping our d3 idea, as black is attacking two soft spots. And although queen to f3 is engine's top choice, we are going to be very consistent with our phase structure, and accordingly, I am going to recommend queen to e2. Okay, black has few choices. Number one, if we continue with bishop to e6, planning to castle on the queen side, not a big deal for us because we can complete our phase 1, d3, and after long castle, bishop to e3, diffuse all black's attack. The only thing you have to know that after queen to b4, do not take on c5, as black is threatening queen captures b2. So first just castle, and now as we seen in earlier part, our space gain on the king side with extra pawn gives white a great advantage. Okay, what about the second move, castle on the king's side? No issues, we are going to continue with d3, completing our first phase. And after rook to e8, bishop to e3 is the obvious choice. And I guess this is the only scenario where after queen to b4, white is forced to castle on the queen side. But if you carefully look at this position, it is white whose attack comes very quickly on the black king, where black attack is a bit slow on our queen side. Well, that is the reason why chess engine suggests that black should go for this sequence. Bishop captures e3, queen captures e3, and now knight to d5, taking the advantage of the pin and double attacking on c3, which by force reached to the endgame after queen to d2, knight captures c3, queen captures c3, queen captures c3, and pawn captures c3. Well, the end result is pretty clear. Both the side has a set of double pawn, but with the extra pawn, white is clearly at the driving seat. Last but probably the most tasting reply against our setup is bishop to b4, which clearly stop our d3 plan. And I think this is the only variation where you need to know how you are going to respond aggressively, and my recommendation is, you guessed it, yup, e5. If knight to d7, then e6 is a very strong reply. So accordingly, the best response here is knight to d5, attacking the c3 knight 3 times. But after white's next tricky reply, knight to d1, not so surprisingly, once again, black is finding the difficulty. Clearly, white has a threat of c3 and nabbing a piece, so he has to avoid it. And after the following obvious continuation, bishop to e7, c3, queen to a4, and now d4. Look at that wonderful pawn chain. White is clearly dominating in the center. And some of you may ask, but what about bishop to e6, as black is clearly ahead in terms of piece development? And yes, indeed, it's true. But after knight to e3, believe it or not, black cannot even castle. Why? What happens if we castle on either side? Well, here is the answer. White has this wonderful resource, queen to c2, and believe me, by force, black has to exchange the queen. Well, what happens if black try to decline it with queen to a5? Guess what? Big time blunder, as after knight to c4, by force, black is losing the queen, as she has only 2 vacant squares available, and it doesn't matter wherever she goes. After knight to d6, a discover attack, and black queen does not belong to this world. So that means here black is obliged to exchange the queen, and after knight captures c2, obviously white is entering into the endgame where he is a clear pawn up and black has some double pawn on the queen side. And it is just a matter of time where white will take out his pieces. These endings are clearly favoring the white camp. That's it, guys. I hope with this mini informative video, now you are confident enough to meet the Stafford Gambit. Just remember my two-phase theory, and whatever surprise black can throw on the board, you can not only easily deal with it, but white get a quick advantageous position just within the opening stage. Thank you for watching this video. Feel free to like, subscribe and comment, and I will meet you in my next episode very soon. Bye and take care.